Dragon's Awakening, the Duke's Son, is changing the plot. Chapter 8, The Practical Test 2. The Cradle had always been more than just an academy. It was the forge in which the children of the Vaise family were broken down, tempered, and reforged into weapons sharp enough to carve a future for the house. Every step taken here was watched. Every glance was measured. Every breath judged. The way they spoke, the way they bowed, even the way they ate their meals, everything was recorded and scored. But not all scores mattered. The endless gradings were not about petty judgments, nor were they about creating perfect children. They were about division, about directing each scion down the path that suited them best. If a child lacked etiquette, they would never see the banquet halls of nobles, but would instead be shuffled into divisions where etiquette was meaningless. If a child's hands fumbled on a blade, then the path of a warrior would be forever barred. In the end, the Cradle did not test for perfection, it tested for placement. Yet hidden within those endless assessments lay a darker test, one that was never openly acknowledged but always understood: loyalty. The Vaise family had rules carved in stone, rules that were older than most of the bloodlines that bowed before them. In the Cradle, those rules were enforced as harshly as anywhere else. Obedience was absolute. Any child who strayed, who dared to push against the boundaries, was marked. Those who broke rules too often were labeled traitors. And in a family like Vaise, a traitor was not just punished, they were erased. Raven knew this better than anyone. He knew because he remembered the plot. He remembered the story of the boy he now inhabited, the boy called Raven Vaise. In the original tale, the boy had been branded a traitor, framed, broken, beaten down in the place that was supposed to shape him. That stretch of time had been carved into his memory as the worst years of Raven's life. But this Raven was not that Raven. He was not going to let history repeat itself. He had vowed never to walk that road of humiliation and false betrayal, and so, from the very beginning, he had warned his companions. No matter what happened, no matter the provocation, they would obey the rules. They would not raise fists in unsanctioned fights. They would not allow themselves to be goaded into mistakes. Words, however, that was a different battlefield altogether. So when the insults began to fly that morning, when his teammates had been moments away from breaking the rule and lashing out, Raven reined them in. He stopped Alex's trembling fists. He silenced Clara's fury. He froze Jake's thunderous step. And when the echoes of laughter still rang in the air, he did not meet it with silence, nor did he meet it with rage. He met it with something far colder. His sigh was soft but deliberate, carrying into the circle of sneers that surrounded them. Then, in a voice calm enough to disarm, he spoke a single name: Alex. The boy stiffened, braced for scolding, but what followed was not rebuke. It was a blade, slipped between words and twisted with precision. "Since when?" Raven asked. "Did humans bark back when they heard dogs barking?" The silence that followed was not just surprise. It was the silence of those who realized the ground had shifted beneath them. The insult, cloaked in lazy disdain, was aimed not at his allies but at their taunters. Alex froze, confusion flickering across his face as he recalled a memory: how once, during a spar, he had called Raven a dog. For a brief moment he wondered if he was supposed to agree, but before he could open his mouth and ruin everything, Clara stepped in. Her laughter rang sharp and cutting like glass breaking in the air. She caught the thread and spun it further, calling their enemies pitiful creatures desperate for attention. The tide shifted. The students who had been grinning only moments ago felt the sting of mockery now turned upon them. Their faces tightened, voices rising in anger, but Clara only smirked wider, her pity more dangerous than any curse. Jake sighed, playing along, his feigned disappointment twisting the knife further. Even Alex, slow though he was, began to grin, catching on to the game. Raven stood silent in the center of it all, letting the storm of tension build until he struck the final note. His voice carried across the field, casual but loud, asking the question that sealed the blow. What kind of teacher, he wondered aloud, would let their dogs run wild without a leash? The world froze. The insult no longer dangled in the air. It had landed, hard and deliberate, at the feet of authority. The students bristled, some looking nervously to the side. They understood the weight of what had just been said. And then came the sound. A cough, sharp, choking, heavy with restrained fury. It drew every head toward the shadowed edge of the training ground. There they were, the teachers, and among them, face flushed a furious red, strode Instructor Vance. The man was a mountain of rage barely contained, his reputation whispered across the cradle as one of its strongest instructors. And yet, his fury was not directed at Raven's group. It was directed at his own students, the very ones Raven had just branded as untrained dogs. Clara whistled low under her breath. Jake's eyes narrowed, faint amusement tugging at his lips. Alex looked as though his lungs had forgotten how to breathe, panic and laughter warring in his expression. Vance's voice ground through clenched teeth, ordering silence. Raven tilted his head, feigning innocence, and addressed him directly. Ah, so you are their teacher. His tone was respectful on the surface, but his words dripped with mockery. He bowed slightly, offering apology laced with venom. He was sorry, he said, if his words had caused offense. He had not realized those dogs, oh, pardon, students, were his. Polite on the surface, cruel beneath, the apology twisted the knife so deeply that Vance's fists clenched white with restrained violence. Yet before the eyes of other teachers and dozens of students, he could not strike back. His silence, his barely suppressed fury, only made the humiliation heavier. Some teachers exchanged glances, smirks tugging at their lips. They were entertained. And the students who had mocked Raven only moments ago, now they stared at the ground, faces pale, wishing to disappear. Vance growled, forcing order back into his voice, commanding all to line up. The practical test was to begin. Raven's smile lingered, cold and private. He remembered well. Vance, in the original tale, had been one of the architects of Raven's suffering, one of the men who had fanned the flames of his supposed betrayal. Raven's heart darkened as he swore silently that the man would not escape his reckoning, but vengeance could wait. Vance was not an enemy he could defeat today. Today was not the day for revenge. It was the day for strategy. The students scrambled to their places, the air thick with nerves now that the test was truly beginning. Clara nudged Raven, her voice a whisper brimming with awe and mischief, asking how he had the courage to defy a teacher so openly. He smirked, answering simply that it was inherent. She clicked her tongue, feigning annoyance, but her eyes glittered. Jake's composure was intact, Alex's nervousness fading into excitement. For them, the day had already begun with a victory, but the real test was only just unfolding. The rules were announced, clear and merciless. Points would not only be earned by strength, but also by restraint. Those who started needless scuffles would be penalized. Those who navigated provocations wisely would be rewarded. It was a truth that silenced many of the discontent murmurs, even as students fumed. For Raven's group, the revelation was sweet. Their earlier restraint, their clever maneuvering, had earned them free points before the first blow was even struck.